everything that everybody is doing is exactly the same as what you're doing. Everybody's just expressing themselves. It's all the universe just expressing itself through each individual form. Same source of energy, same essence, same presence of being. So you look into yourself, if you want to understand this, and this is really fun. This is a really fun thing about life, is that when you want to understand what other people are doing, you can pick apart every little thing and you can analyze their actions as though beneath a microscope and try to, work out all the immaculate details. But if you look inside of yourself and you start to get in touch with why it is that you do things and why it is that you behave a certain way or why it is you perceive the world a certain way, you realize that everybody is doing the same thing. They're just doing it in their own way. Because what you're doing is you obviously are aware that it's like, okay, this is my unique take on the universal expression, on the cosmic creativity, but that's what everyone else is doing. It's like you can be, maybe you're an author, you like to write, and you say, oh, I don't understand how people can paint. I can understand how somebody writes, but I can't understand why someone would paint. But you realize, you look inside yourself, you realize that there's just unity. There's unity consciousness in your being, as your being, right where you are. And you start to realize that, to a painter, their brushstrokes are their poetry. Their brushstrokes are telling a story. And to an author, the author's attempts to write a story, that's their way of painting. They're painting a picture. They're just painting a picture with words. And an artist is painting sentences with pictures. See, this is a way of looking at it. And then you say, a musician is totally different than an author. But a musician tells a story with their musical notes. And maybe an author, because you can look at it any way you want to look at it, really. It will make sense if it's coming from your heart. It will make sense if it's coming from right where you are, where you understand yourself and you acknowledge yourself and you are willing to play the role that is natural for you to play. Then all of a sudden, everything else starts falling into place. You realize there's a total order to the whole cosmic unfolding. Everybody's playing their role, or they're getting ready to play their role, or they're working out some of the kinks on their way to playing their role. Everybody is following the cosmic compulsion to the best of their ability. Everybody without exception. And everything without exception. Even the inanimate objects. Even the most, even the slugs in the forest and the little bugs and the mosquitoes and those little flies that whenever you go for a walk in the woods, all they do is buzz around and try to fly into your eyeball. I don't know if you've encountered those ones, but it's like sometimes you wonder, what on earth could these things be doing? What is their role? What are they? But they are performing a role. No matter how insignificant it seems or how ridiculous it seems, it's all part of the cosmic compulsion. It's just creativity in motion. The whole thing without exception. And it's like sometimes creativity can be muddy and messy too. So, creativity, somebody might hear me say that, or might hear somebody say that, it's like, oh, creativity. But how can, creativity is supposed to be beautiful. Not everything in life is beautiful. But it doesn't mean that's not part of the cosmic dance. Doesn't mean it's not part of the cosmic creativity. We say life is a dance, life is a work of art. But there are muddy lines and on a painting. There are when you dance, you sometimes stumble. You might trip over your own feet. You might step on your dancing partner's feet. You might bump into something you don't mean to bump into. That's still all part of the dance. It's like all the clumsy, uncoordinated movements, they flow seamlessly into the more elegant expressions. And where we do find there is a certain muddiness in the experience, there is a certain messiness in the experience, this is really just the universe's way of kind of clearing out certain illusions. Because, what we need to remember is that consciousness is motivating the whole thing. Everything is wrapped in consciousness, in a universal unity consciousness. And in order for that consciousness to have an experience with itself, it has to create the illusion of separation. And when you're aware of that in yourself, then you can have then the play of the vision, the play of like you're you and I'm me, it can be more fun, it can be more lighthearted. But when we get so sunk into the illusion of it and take the illusion to be real, then it can become messy and it can become, it can build on itself in a way that maybe is not quite natural. But no matter how messy the painting becomes or how beautiful the painting becomes, it never leaves the canvas of being. It never leaves the substratum of existence. It's always, it's this immaculate mesh of consciousness, this field of being that can withstand any pressure that exists within it, because it's more yielding than water. It's lighter than air and yet more yielding than water. It can rouse entire, just titanic, megalithic balls of fire and light and plasma in the form of these suns. It can do all of these things and create entire worlds and yet be totally gentle and subtle and just be like the most nourishing, restful presence that you've ever felt. And yet it can create tremendous works of just unfathomable glory. This is the grace of God. This is the grace of being. Prime creator, that's another word, or another phrase that is heard, I hear sometimes. Creator, creator of the creativity. Seeing all the different reflections of ourself in each one. And this is why when you come back into yourself, this is not, I'm not somebody who's researched the cosmos through a telescope. I'm not somebody who sat down and looked at book after book after book, trying to fill my head with knowledge, intellectual knowledge. And I don't mention this to cast any kind of shade on intellectual pursuits. Intellectual pursuits are just as much a part of the creativity. They're just as wonderful, just as beautiful as everything else. But at the same time, you don't need to have an intellectual understanding of presence, of being, in order to have the direct experience. How do I know that it's the same consciousness that's motivating these words right now as is motivating the turning of entire planets and entire galaxies, entire solar systems? Just by looking into myself. When I am nothing apart from that presence, and I'm just resting, abiding in that, just resting in that, acknowledging that, just happily, willingly, just surrendering. Everything that is basically just the waves on this ocean of vast, infinite potential, then it becomes very, very clear that this is how it is. I don't know if I can explain it logically in an objective sense, but it's unquestionable. It's just undeniable that, because you realize that this presence of being, it's not bound by space and time. This infinite universal consciousness is not bound by space and time. Time and space take its reading from the consciousness itself. In a way, sometimes you might hear the word depthless. How much depth does the consciousness have? Well, it has infinite depth, depending on how you look at it. You can go for an infinity into anything. Maybe physically, maybe energetically, maybe you can project your consciousness. Many different ways to look at that. Many different ways to experience that. Again, the dynamic reality that manifests itself out of the consciousness is full of diversity. And there's no right or wrong way to really express it. So much as you simply honor who you are in that and what you are. But the consciousness itself, it really cannot be measured. It cannot be quantified. You can't measure it with a ruler, or you can't measure it with a computer. The computer is an emanation of the consciousness. The attempts to measure it are manifestations of the consciousness. The logic that we use to categorize the intangible and attempt to make tangible the intangible, they're just manifestations of the intangibility itself. So this is the funny thing about it, because everything that we take to be tangible is actually the intangible in just a costume. It's no more, it really doesn't get back to the essence of that unity consciousness, that non-dual being, that presence of being, any more than anything else can. You see, this is where you let go. You don't build up more forms. You don't build up more ideas. You don't build up more concepts at this point. This is where you let all of that go. You let those things dissolve. And then you rest into that presence. And so, in that presence, as that presence, just in that willingness to let go of your habitual patterns of thinking, your attachment to form, or fixation on different desires, these kinds of things, you realize there's just this underlying infinity, a vibrant potentiality that's giving life to all the motions of your own individual life. Even the person the role that you play in the person that you interact with the world as is emanating from this presence. Just like when you go to sleep at night and you wake up in the morning, there's like a moment, there's a gap between your sleeping self and your waking self, and you realize that there's like a moment, there's a period of time before you're not fully awake, you're not fully your person, but you're still fully conscious. And then all the programming, the organic programming of your body and mind, it kind of comes online. And you're aware of that process, and you're like, oh, okay, there I am, here I am. It's your person booting up. You've been resting in non-dual awareness all night, in some way or another. Even if you've been dreaming, it's still, that dream is just another canvas in this gallery of being. And you wake up in the morning, and that person comes to life again. Just like you abide in this deep non-dual awareness. Same thing as when you go to bed and have a deep sleep, but you just stay aware, you stay awake, and you're consciously aware of it. That's the only difference. Everybody experiences it. Just some of us have, for whatever reason, become conscious of it in our waking state. And there's a beautiful, and I realized, there's so much grace in that. And that's just, it's just so beautiful. There's so much grace in the whole experience, it's just so much fun, so much joy, it's so light, you don't have to take things so seriously, because you don't take yourself so seriously. This is the thing, where it comes back to like knowing yourself, being fully aware of yourself, it's like when you don't take yourself so seriously, you don't take the role that you play so seriously, then the rest of life lightens up as well. it can be what it is, it can be what it is. You're not trying to sweep things under the rug. You're not trying to avoid feelings. You're not trying to disassociate, or you're not trying to change anything per se. You're just acknowledging the role that you play. That, it's not really that big a deal. And even to the point, like if you had to die, we're all going to lose our body. The body's going to go back to the earth at some point. We're all going to have that experience, and I've probably had that experience 1,000 times over through different lives and in this kind of thing. But if you have to come to the point where you're going to die, is it really that big a deal? Is it really that big a deal? Because you let go, you let the fear flow through, just like any other thought, any other feeling. You let the person who you think, this person, I got to preserve this sense of a person. I got to preserve this sense of myself. And then that all goes, and then you realize, wow, I'm still here. And not only am I still here, but I'm like peaceful and calm and vast and just at peace. So, it's like you lose this little sense of yourself and you become so much more than you could ever imagine. So there's no fear of loss at that point. If the fear comes, it's just very superficial. You still grieve, you still express, you still honor the role that things play in your life and the role that others, loved ones who maybe pass on, you honor the role that they play in your life, but you don't really mourn for them so deeply because you know where they're going. You know where all things and all beings and everything that comes to life, you know where it goes back to also, because you've looked inside yourself. And there's nothing disagreeable there. There's nothing wrong there. There's nothing bad there. There's nothing to fight with there. There's no conflict there. It's just immaculate peace. And this is why when it comes to the life that can rise into so many diverse forms and experiences, it can do that because this underlying peace, this underlying presence is just so accommodating. It's just full of vibrant potential. And it can grow into the summer, and it can return in the winter, and it can become meadows of flowers, and it can wilt back into the earth. And it's all this beautiful dance, this inhalation of breath, this exhalation of breath, this diversity multiplying and then returning to immaculate peace. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing to fear in that. The fear and the negative feelings that we call negative, they're just flowers in the field. they're just more multiplicity. Maybe they're kind of stinky flowers. Maybe the fruit they bear, maybe it's a bit bitter. But they're still part of the garden of life. They're still part of the meadow of life. It's like to put into perspective, it's like the forest, the trees and the plants, they don't fear the soil. The animals in the forest, they don't fear their den. They don't fear their nest. The fish in the ocean, they don't fear the water. So then why do we, humans of consciousness, humans of universal potentiality, cosmic creativity, why should we fear the presence of our own being?